The morning sun cast long shadows across the military shooting range in Fort Bragg, North Carolina. Sarah Martinez had never expected to find herself standing behind a group of Navy SEALs, watching them prepare for their weekly marksmanship training. She was there as a civilian contractor, a software engineer who had been hired to upgrade the range's digital targeting system. Her job was supposed to be simple: install new software, test the equipment, and leave. Sarah had grown up on a ranch in Montana, where her grandfather taught her to shoot cans off fence posts when she was just 8 years old. By the time she was 16, she could hit a playing card from 200 yards with her grandfather's old hunting rifle. But that was years ago, before college, before her career in technology, before life pulled her away from the mountains and into the corporate world. The SEALs were struggling that morning. These were some of the most elite soldiers in the world, men who had completed one of the most grueling training programs known to mankind. Yet today something was off. Shot after shot missed the mark. The instructor, a gruff sergeant named Williams, was becoming increasingly frustrated. His weathered face showed the strain of watching his best marksman fail to hit targets that should have been routine. Sarah watched from the observation deck as the team went through their drills. The new targeting system she had installed was working perfectly, displaying real-time data on wind speed, distance, and environmental factors. The technology wasn't the problem. She could see the slight tremor in some of the shooters' hands, the way their breathing patterns were inconsistent. These were small details that most people wouldn't notice, but growing up hunting with her grandfather had taught her to observe everything. During a break in the training, Sarah approached Sergeant Williams. She introduced herself and explained her role in installing the new system. Williams was polite but clearly preoccupied with his team's performance. They had an important evaluation coming up, and today's results were far below their usual standards. Sarah hesitated for a moment, then made a suggestion that would change everything. She had noticed that the rifle scopes weren't properly calibrated for the new digital system. The slight adjustment in the targeting display was throwing off the shooter's muscle memory. It was a technical issue that only someone who understood both the equipment and marksmanship would catch. Williams listened carefully as Sarah explained the problem and offered to help recalibrate the equipment. As they worked together to adjust the scopes, Sarah found herself sharing stories about learning to shoot on her grandfather's ranch. Williams was surprised to learn about her background. In his 20-year military career, he had rarely met civilians who understood firearms the way Sarah did. Her knowledge was practical and deep, not just theoretical. The conversation was interrupted when one of the SEALs, a young corporal named Jackson, jokingly asked if the computer lady could do better than they had been doing. The comment was meant to lighten the mood, but there was an edge of frustration in his voice. Sarah looked at the rifle range, then back at the group of elite soldiers who were watching her with curious expressions. The moment stretched longer than it should have. Sarah could feel the weight of their attention. These men had dedicated their lives to perfecting their skills, and here she was, a civilian in khaki pants and a polo shirt, standing among them like she belonged. Part of her wanted to politely decline and return to her computer work. But another part of her, the part that remembered the satisfaction of hitting impossible targets with her grandfather cheering her on, was stirring to life after years of dormancy. Sarah looked at the rifle in Corporal Jackson's hands, then at the targets downrange. The words came out before she could stop them. "Let me try." The shooting range fell silent. Even the wind seemed to pause as everyone processed what the quiet software engineer had just said. Sergeant Williams raised an eyebrow, and several of the SEALs exchanged glances. This was unprecedented. Jackson handed over his rifle with a skeptical smile. "Ma'am, this isn't a hunting rifle. This is military-grade precision equipment. The kick alone might knock you down." Sarah accepted the weapon, feeling its familiar weight in her hands. It was heavier than her grandfather's old rifle, but the balance was similar. She had fired military weapons before during her brief stint in the Army National Guard during college, though she had never mentioned that to anyone here. As Sarah positioned herself at the firing line, she could hear whispered conversations behind her. Some of the SEALs were making quiet bets about whether she would even hit the target board. Others were genuinely curious to see what would happen. Sergeant Williams called for silence and gave Sarah the same safety briefing he would give any shooter. Though his tone suggested he was going through the motions more than anything else, Sarah took her time examining the rifle. She checked the scope settings, adjusted the stock to fit her frame, and tested the trigger pull. These small preparations caught the attention of the more experienced shooters. She wasn't handling the weapon like a nervous amateur. Her movements were deliberate and confident. When she finally raised the rifle to her shoulder, her stance was textbook perfect. The first target was set at 100 yards, a standard distance for warm-up shots. Sarah controlled her breathing the way her grandfather had taught her, finding the natural pause between exhale and inhale. She had learned long ago that the secret to accurate shooting wasn't just about aim. It was about becoming perfectly still in that moment between heartbeats. The rifle fired with a sharp crack that echoed across the range. The bullet hit dead center. Not just somewhere in the bullseye, but exactly in the middle, creating a perfect hole through the 10 ring. The electronic scoring system immediately displayed the result, a perfect 10. The murmur of conversation behind Sarah stopped completely. Jackson stepped forward to look through the spotting scope, then looked back at Sarah with the expression of disbelief. Sergeant Williams moved the target to 200 yards without saying a word. This was where many recreational shooters began to struggle, where wind and distance started to become significant factors. Sarah made a small adjustment to her scope, accounting for the increased distance. She took her time, feeling the rhythm of her heartbeat, waiting for that perfect moment of stillness. The second shot rang out, another perfect hit. This time, the bullet hole was so close to the center that it was difficult to distinguish from a machine-made mark. The SEALs were no longer joking or making bets. They were watching with the intense focus of professionals who recognized exceptional skill when they saw it. Sarah stepped back from the rifle, surprised by how natural it felt to be shooting again after so many years away from the sport. Williams moved the target to 300 yards, then 400. Each time, Sarah took her shot with calm precision. Each time, the bullet found its mark with devastating accuracy. By the fifth shot, word had begun to spread around the base. Other personnel started gathering at the observation area to watch the civilian contractor, who was outperforming Navy SEALs. The mood on the range had shifted completely. What had started as a frustrated training session had become something else entirely. The SEALs were no longer focused on their own poor performance. They were witnessing something extraordinary. Sarah could feel the pressure building with each successful shot, but she also felt something she hadn't experienced in years. The pure joy of doing something she was truly gifted at. Word of Sarah's shooting had reached the base commander's office within an hour. Colonel Richards arrived at the range just as Sarah was preparing for her 20th consecutive perfect shot. He stood quietly in the back, watching this unassuming woman make shots that would challenge even his most experienced marksman. The crowd around the observation deck had grown to include Marines, Army Rangers, and Air Force personnel who had heard the rumors and came to see for themselves. Sarah was entering a zone that athletes sometimes describe but rarely achieve. Every variable seemed to align perfectly in her mind. Wind direction, bullet drop, target distance, breathing rhythm. She could feel her grandfather's presence, remembering his patient voice explaining how to read the environment, how to become one with the rifle, how to trust in the fundamentals even when everything else felt uncertain. Sergeant Williams had stopped calling out distances. The targets were now set at ranges that would challenge Olympic-level marksmen. 500 yards, 600, 700. Each shot continued to find its mark with mechanical precision. The electronic scoring system had recorded 27 consecutive perfect tens, a feat that would have been remarkable for a trained sniper, let alone a civilian contractor who had picked up a rifle on a whim. The SEALs who had initially been skeptical were now studying Sarah's technique with professional interest. They noticed how she never rushed her shots, how she seemed to read wind conditions that others couldn't detect, how her follow-through remained consistent regardless of the distance. Corporal Jackson, who had handed her the rifle in jest, was taking notes on her breathing pattern and stance adjustments. As Sarah prepared for her 30th shot, Colonel Richards approached Sergeant Williams. "How many has she missed?" he asked quietly. Williams checked his scorecard and shook his head. "None, sir. 30 shots, 30 perfect bullseyes. I've never seen anything like it." The colonel watched Sarah make minute adjustments to her scope for an 800-yard target, a distance where even trained snipers expected to make occasional misses. The pressure was mounting, but not from the crowd or the impossible streak she was maintaining. Sarah felt pressure from within herself, a familiar perfectionism that had driven her academic and professional success, but it also caused her to step away from competitive shooting years earlier. She remembered the state championships in high school, where the pressure of maintaining a perfect score had ultimately cost her the title when she overthought a crucial shot. But something was different today. Perhaps it was the years of distance from competitive shooting, or maybe it was the pure joy of rediscovering a skill she thought she had lost. Sarah found herself shooting not for the crowd or to prove anything to the skeptical SEALs, but for the simple pleasure of hitting what she aimed at. Each shot was a conversation with her younger self, a bridge across the years to the girl who had learned to shoot among the Montana mountains. The 45th shot hit center at 900 yards. The electronic system confirmed what everyone could see through their scopes. Another perfect 10. The crowd had grown silent, understanding that they were witnessing something historic. Even the most experienced shooters on the base had never seen such sustained accuracy at these distances. Sarah lowered the rifle and looked back at the group of military personnel who were staring at her with expressions ranging from amazement to professional curiosity. Colonel Richard stepped forward and introduced himself. He asked Sarah about her background, her training, and how she had developed such extraordinary skill. As she told her story about learning to shoot with her grandfather, about the ranch in Montana, and the countless hours of practice on targets both living and inanimate, the military personnel listened with growing respect. This wasn't just natural talent. This was the result of years of foundational training that had been refined by an analytical mind and perfected through patient practice. The colonel made a request that would change the trajectory of Sarah's afternoon completely. He wanted to see if she could maintain her accuracy under different conditions, not just static targets at various distances, but moving targets, timed challenges, and shooting positions that would test her adaptability. Sarah looked at the rifle in her hands, then at the expectant faces around her, and realized that her simple equipment installation job had become something much more significant. The challenge escalated quickly. Colonel Richards ordered the range crew to set up moving targets, something they typically reserved for advanced sniper training. Sarah watched as mechanical targets began traversing across the landscape at various speeds and distances. This was completely different from the static shooting she had been doing. Moving targets required not just accuracy, but the ability to predict movement, lead the target, and time the shot perfectly. Sarah had hunted moving game with her grandfather, but those had been living animals with unpredictable patterns. These mechanical targets moved with mathematical precision, which in some ways made them easier to predict, but required a different kind of calculation. She studied the movement patterns for several minutes, timing their speed and noting how the wind affected their motion. The crowd watched patiently as she prepared for this new challenge. The first moving target was set at 300 yards, moving at a walking pace from left to right. Sarah raised the rifle, tracked the target for several seconds to establish its rhythm, then smoothly followed through with her shot. The target stopped immediately as the bullet struck dead center. The range erupted in applause, but Sarah was already focused on the next challenge. Sergeant Williams increased the difficulty systematically. Faster targets, longer distances, multiple targets requiring rapid engagement. Each challenge was met with the same calm precision. Sarah's ability to quickly calculate lead times and adjust for moving targets impressed even the sniper instructors who had joined the growing crowd. They recognized skills that typically took months of specialized training to develop. During a brief break, one of the SEAL snipers, Chief Petty Officer Martinez, approached Sarah with professional curiosity. He had been watching her technique carefully and noticed something unusual about her approach to moving targets. While most shooters focused intensely on the target itself, Sarah seemed to be reading the entire environment. Wind patterns, ground conditions, even the mechanical rhythm of the target systems. Her situational awareness was extraordinary. Chief Martinez asked Sarah to explain her thought process. As she described how she visualized the bullet's path through three-dimensional space, accounting for all the variables simultaneously, the military personnel began to understand that they were dealing with someone who approached marksmanship as both an art and a science. Her engineering background gave her an analytical framework that complemented her intuitive shooting skills perfectly. The afternoon's final challenge was announced by Colonel Richards himself. He had contacted the base's top sniper instructor, Master Sergeant Thompson, who had driven over from the Special Operations Training Facility. Thompson was a legend in military circles, a man who had trained some of the most effective snipers in the armed forces. He would set up a course that challenged every aspect of marksmanship: precision, speed, adaptability, and performance under pressure. The course Thompson designed was brutal. 10 targets at varying distances from 200 to 1,000 yards, some static, some moving, some partially concealed. Shooters would have 90 seconds to engage all targets, with points deducted for misses and bonus points for hitting certain high-value targets. Most trained snipers considered it a success to hit 7 out of 10 targets under these conditions. Sarah studied the course layout carefully, noting sight lines, target priorities, and the most efficient sequence for engagement. She had 90 seconds to hit 10 targets that would challenge a Navy SEAL sniper. The pressure was unlike anything she had experienced, even during her competitive shooting days. Hundreds of military personnel were now watching, and she could feel the weight of their expectations. As Sarah took her position, she closed her eyes for a moment and thought about her grandfather. She remembered his advice about staying calm under pressure. Don't think about what you might miss. Think about what you're going to hit. She opened her eyes, checked her rifle one final time, and nodded to Master Sergeant Thompson that she was ready to begin. The timer started, and Sarah began the most challenging 90 seconds of her shooting career. The first target fell quickly, then the second. She moved with fluid efficiency, engaging targets in an order that minimized rifle movement while maximizing her chances of success. The crowd watched in stunned silence as she systematically worked through the course with mechanical precision. With 15 seconds remaining, Sarah had successfully engaged 9 targets. The final target was the most difficult. A small moving target at 800 yards, partially concealed and moving at an irregular pattern. She had one shot, one chance to complete what was already being recognized as an extraordinary performance. Sarah took a deep breath, found her natural point of aim, and prepared for the shot that would define her remarkable afternoon. The final target moved erratically behind a barrier, exposing only small portions of itself at irregular intervals. Sarah had to predict not just where it would be, but when the brief window of opportunity would present itself. The seconds ticked away as she tracked the pattern, her rifle following the target's movement while she calculated the precise moment to fire. With 8 seconds left, Sarah saw her opportunity. The target would emerge from behind cover in exactly 2 seconds, moving left to right at a specific speed. She led the target, controlled her breathing, and fired just as the timer reached 5 seconds. The bullet traveled across 800 yards in what seemed like slow motion to the watching crowd. The target stopped moving instantly as the bullet found its mark dead center. Perfect score. 10 targets, 10 hits, all within the time limit. The range exploded in cheers and applause that could be heard across the entire base. Even Master Sergeant Thompson, a man known for his reserved demeanor, was shaking his head in amazement. In 25 years of training military snipers, he had never seen a perfect score on that course, especially not from someone firing it for the first time. Colonel Richards approached Sarah as she set down the rifle. Her hands were steady, but she could feel the adrenaline coursing through her system. The colonel's expression was serious as he asked her a question that would echo in her mind for years to come. Have you ever considered putting those skills to use in service of your country? Sarah looked around at the faces of the military personnel who had gathered to watch her shoot, and for the first time in her adult life, she seriously considered a different path. The news of Sarah's performance spread beyond Fort Bragg within hours. Military shooting instructors from other bases called to verify the reports. The story seemed too remarkable to believe. A civilian contractor had outperformed Navy SEALs and achieved a perfect score on one of the most challenging sniper courses in the military. Videos of her shooting began circulating among military personnel, and Sarah found herself becoming something of a legend. Over the following days, Sarah received calls from military recruiters, private security companies, and competitive shooting organizations. Everyone wanted to know if she was interested in turning her remarkable skills into a career. The attention was overwhelming for someone who had simply intended to install computer software and return to her quiet life in the corporate world. But the shooting range had awakened, something in Sarah that had been dormant for years. She remembered why she had loved marksmanship so much as a young woman: the satisfaction of perfect precision, the mental discipline required for consistent accuracy. Her corporate job suddenly felt mundane in comparison to the electricity she had felt during those intense 90 seconds on the sniper course. Sarah spent that evening walking around the base, thinking about the colonel's question and her grandfather's influence on her life. He had taught her more than just how to shoot. He had taught her about dedication, practice, and the importance of using one's gifts responsibly. She realized that her engineering skills and her marksmanship abilities could be combined in ways she had never considered. The decision wasn't easy. Sarah had built a successful career in technology, with a comfortable salary and promising future prospects, but she also understood that she possessed a rare combination of skills that could serve a greater purpose. The military personnel she had met were clearly dedicated to protecting others, and their respect for her abilities had been genuine and profound. 3 days after her remarkable performance on the shooting range, Sarah made a decision that surprised everyone, including herself. She submitted her resignation to the technology company and began the process of applying for a specialized position within the military's training programs. She would use her engineering background to improve training systems, while also serving as a marksmanship instructor for elite units. The young woman who had grown up shooting cans off fence posts in Montana had found her calling in an unexpected place. Sarah realized that some paths in life reveal themselves only when we're brave enough to say, "Let me try," when opportunity presents itself. Her grandfather would have been proud to see his patient teaching bearing fruit in such an extraordinary way, serving something larger than herself while honoring the skills he had so carefully nurtured in her. 6 months later, Sarah found herself standing in front of a classroom filled with some of the military's most elite marksmen. She wore the uniform of a civilian contractor, specializing in advanced marksmanship training, a position that had been created specifically for her unique combination of skills. The same SEALs who had watched her shoot that day at Fort Bragg were now among her students. Eager to learn the techniques that had made her performance so extraordinary, Sarah's approach to teaching marksmanship was revolutionary. She combined traditional shooting fundamentals with engineering principles, helping students understand the physics behind accurate shooting in ways that made the skills more consistent and repeatable. Her classes included modules on environmental calculation, equipment optimization, and mental preparation techniques that drew from both her grandfather's wisdom and her technical background. The military had also assigned Sarah to work on improving training equipment and procedures. Her software engineering skills proved invaluable in developing new simulation systems and analyzing shooter performance data. She could identify technical problems that others missed, while also understanding the human factors that affected marksmanship performance. Her dual expertise made her uniquely qualified to bridge the gap between technology and practical application. The story of Sarah's remarkable shooting demonstration had become legend within military circles. New recruits heard about the civilian contractor who had outshot Navy SEALs, and the tale grew with each telling. But for Sarah, the real satisfaction came from seeing her students improve and knowing that her teaching might one day save lives in the field. The skills her grandfather had taught her on a ranch in Montana were now being passed on to soldiers who would carry them into harm's way. Sarah's personal life had changed dramatically as well. She had found a community among the military personnel that she had never experienced in corporate life. These were people who understood dedication, precision, and the importance of excellence under pressure. Her colleagues respected her abilities and valued her contributions in ways that made her feel truly appreciated for who she was and what she could. The shooting range at Fort Bragg had been renamed in honor of Sarah's historic performance, though she had protested the gesture. A plaque near the firing line commemorated the day a quiet software engineer had achieved 100 consecutive perfect shots, inspiring everyone who witnessed it to reconsider what was possible with dedication and skill. The plaque included her grandfather's favorite saying, "Precision is the intersection of preparation and opportunity." On quiet evenings, Sarah would return to that same firing line where her life had changed so dramatically. She would set up targets and practice the fundamentals her grandfather had taught her, maintaining the skills that had opened doors she never knew existed. The little girl who had learned to shoot cans off fence posts had become a master instructor whose influence would be felt for generations. Sarah's journey reminded everyone who knew her story that extraordinary abilities often remain hidden until the right moment presents itself. Her willingness to step forward when challenged, to say "let me try" despite the odds and expectations, had not only revealed her remarkable talents, but had also inspired others to pursue excellence in their own lives. The transformation from software engineer to marksmanship expert hadn't been easy, But Sarah knew she had found her true calling. She was using her gifts in service of something greater than herself, honoring both her grandfather's memory and the faith that Colonel Richards and his personnel had shown in her abilities. Sometimes the most important moments in life come disguised as simple challenges, and Sarah's story proved that courage to accept those challenges can lead to extraordinary outcomes. Years later, when students asked Sarah about the secret to her success, she would smile and repeat her grandfather's wisdom. Excellence wasn't about natural talent alone, but about the willingness to practice with purpose, learn from every shot, and never stop striving for perfection. The ranch in Montana had taught her to shoot, but the military had taught her to teach, and in combining those skills, she had found a way to make a lasting impact on the world around her.